I think it's fantastic to see a genuinely spontaneous anti-government movement. You know, what a refreshing change. You come from Europe, where in every capital city there are crowds on the streets in favour of entitlements and against spending cuts. And then you come here and there are crowds on the streets against entitlements and in favour of spending and borrowing and taxing less, you know, which is wonderful. I mean, that's how the system is supposed to work. It's particularly important when there is a notionally right-of-centre majority in Congress for the Tea Party to keep the pressure on. Now is the beginning of when it matters. It's not job done, because there are so many countervailing pressures. Maybe you have to have been an elected legislator to see this, but there are so many things that pull people into the system, and there has to be a countervailing force in their constituency pulling them the other way. But I think the Tea Party movement are the sons of liberty of today. They have exactly done what the founders envisaged a free citizenry as doing, which is to say they've sprung to the defence of their ancient liberties when their own representatives have prejudiced them. And I hope that their children and grandchildren will recognise what they've done. People in almost every country are wiser than their leaders. And there was a very neat demonstration of this at the time of the bailouts. In those panicky days in the fall of 2008, an almost immediate and almost unanimous consensus formed around the idea that we had to bail out the banks. In both the parties here, in both the parties in Britain, all of the mainstream media, all of the economists, all of the clever people, right? There was no alternative, so we kept being told. But then when the first opinion polls came in, it turned out that a vast majority of Americans rejected the idea that taxpayers' money should be used to rescue some very wealthy individuals from the consequences of their own errors. Now, 3 years on, they were right. You know, as is almost always the case, the voters were right and the politicians were wrong. And many politicians indeed paid the price at the most recent election for having supported these packages. The problem is not one of convincing people. You know, I would always repose my trust in the wisdom of the American electorate rather than the people who speak for it. The problem is, how do we align public policy with public opinion? How do we get people in government to do what their constituents want? We have this problem much more badly than you do. When I say we, I mean the British and particularly the European Union, because government is more remote, it's more centralised, it's more immune to public opinion. You still have a number of mechanisms to impose your will on your legislators, above all open primaries. So the whole country would look very different without that. But also referendums, ballot procedures, recall votes and so on. There's a number of mechanisms and procedures there to hold the governors to account. But even with that, people still end up being captured by the machine, by the interests of the great standing civil service, the apparat, that, because they're members of the executive, have an interest in higher spending and more government power. I think your founders knew what they were doing when they put Congress in Article 1 of the Constitution and the Presidency in Article 2. Taxes should be set and budgets approved by elected legislators who have to answer to the rest of us, rather than by bureaucrats in the executive whose livelihood depends on state spending.